felt like coldness you will recognize as someone who's never been held safely enough to open warm. You'll begin to realize that nobody is hard to read, they are hard to accept, because the truth underneath is often messy, scared, raw. And if you can't sit with your own mess, how could you possibly make space for someone else's? This is what real reading is. It's not about decoding expressions or memorizing signals. It's about listening deep, not just with ears, but with presence, with patience, with the willingness to be wrong, to stay when it gets uncomfortable, to see without needing to fix. When someone says I'm fine, but their jaw tightens, you'll notice. When they smile, but their eyes stay distant, you'll feel it. When their story is perfect, too smooth, too clean, you'll question what pain had to be buried to keep it that polished. And not to confront, not to expose, but to simply know, to honor what's unspoken, what they maybe don't even know they're saying. Reading people on this level doesn't make you powerful, it makes you responsible, because now you can't pretend you didn't see. Now their armor is transparent, and the question becomes, what will you do with what you see? Judge it, use it, or hold it gently, like you wish someone held yours. This is why most people don't read deeply, because deep sight demands deep compassion, and deep compassion is uncomfortable. It means your walls need to fall too. It means you can no longer hide behind certainty, superiority, or silence. You become visible in the act of truly seeing. Nietzsche didn't teach this so we could manipulate others. He taught it so we could stop manipulating ourselves. So we could stop performing, stop faking clarity, stop wearing masks so tight we forget what our own face feels like. He said the greatest act of reading is not seeing through others. It's letting yourself be seen, because the more you allow yourself to be seen without performance, the more you stop fearing the way others might see you. You realize the goal isn't to be unreadable. The goal is to be real, to speak without armor, to stand in the truth of who you are, even when your voice shakes, even when your hands tremble. You were never supposed to be perfectly put together. You were supposed to be whole, and wholeness includes the jagged edges, the scars, the contradictions. That's what makes you human. That's what makes you real. So let them read you. Let them see the crack. Let them witness the soft center behind the strong front. Let the silence between your words say as much as the words themselves. Because someone out there has been waiting not to hear your performance, but to meet your presence. And when you start living this way, something shifts. You stop looking for people who make you feel seen. You start becoming someone who sees, who listens, who stays, who doesn't flinch when the truth isn't pretty. And suddenly the world starts feeling less like a stage and more like home. Because maybe the point was never to hide well. Maybe the point was to be found by someone who recognizes the language you never learned to speak, the language of being, the language of stillness, the quiet knowing that says, I see you, not your mask, not your defense, but you. That's the real power, not reading others, but letting yourself be read and staying open anyway. You don't need a feeling to see what's really there. You just need to notice the details, the subtle shifts, the pauses, the tension behind a word, the flicker in their eyes when they think no one is watching. Reading people isn't about guessing what they want, it's about understanding what they're afraid to show. Nietzsche wasn't talking about judging or exposing others. He was revealing a profound truth about survival and vulnerability. Every mask, no matter how strong, is a shelter built from pain, fear, and the desperate need to be safe. It's not a lie, it's protection. And when you realize this, your whole perspective changes. You stop being an opponent trying to crack the code and become a witness to human fragility. We all learned early that being real could hurt us. We learned that to be loved or accepted, we must hide parts of ourselves. That meant silencing tears, swallowing doubts, dimming our light. So we crafted masks to meet expectation, to fit in, to avoid rejection. We call these masks personality, but they're just the armor we wear to navigate a world that often punishes truth. The deeper the spirit, the heavier the armor. The more sensitive and authentic someone is, the more layers they add, because authenticity can feel too risky for themselves, and for others. But here's the secret. Masks can't hold forever. They leak, crack, slip, they spill in restless movement, uneven tone, forced smiles, and the invisible tension beneath the surface. The person who says, I'm fine with clenched fists, isn't fine. The one who shouts positivity, but can't bear silence, isn't peaceful. The one who insists they don't care what others think, but constantly checks their reflection, is battling a hidden storm. These contradictions are not deception, they're the mask breaking. And if you pay close enough attention, you'll see the real person behind it all. Not polished, not perfect, but raw, scared, and real. When you stop trusting masks, you don't just become better at reading others, you start recognizing your own masks. You begin to see the moments you've hidden who you really are, the times you've played a part just to survive. Clarity isn't about understanding others. First, it's about being honest with yourself. Reading people isn't a superpower. It's not some mysterious skill only a few possess. It's about paying attention to what most ignore: patterns, habits, repeated fears and defenses. People are surprisingly predictable, not because they're shallow, but because they're trapped in stories they haven't finished. These unfinished stories shape behaviors, reactions, and the masks they wear every day. You might have heard someone say, "I just have a feeling about," but real insight isn't about vague feelings, it's about seeing the patterns others miss. It's noticing the ways people protect themselves, the small tells that reveal what they're really feeling inside. When you understand this, you stop being fooled by appearances and start connecting with the truth beneath. This doesn't mean you become cynical or judgmental. It means you become compassionate and patient. You realize everyone is fighting their own hidden battles, wearing their own fragile armor. And when you meet people with this understanding, something shifts. You listen different, you respond different, you see beyond the mask to the human beneath. That's where real connection begins, not in perfection, but in vulnerability, not in polished appearances, but in shared humanity. And when you embrace this, you give yourself permission to be seen as you truly are, without masks, without pretense, just you. So don't rush to decode or fix. Instead, slow down, notice the cracks, listen to the silences. Watch for the moments when the mask slips, because that's where truth lives, in the messy, imperfect and beautiful reality of being human. And the most profound reading you'll ever do is the one inside, seeing your own fears, your own masks, and choosing to let them fall. That's the beginning of real freedom. Smart readers don't trust feelings alone. They rely on patterns, small signals that surface repeatedly across conversations, moods, and moments. It all begins with subtle shifts, the barely noticeable hesitation when someone agrees to something they secretly doubt, the voice that strains to sound confident but trembles just beneath the surface. Then come the contradiction, the person who claims to be relaxed but can't resist correcting others, the man who insists status doesn't matter, yet name drops casually, the woman who preaches independence while secretly longing to be chosen. These aren't mistakes or random quirks. They are signs of deeper hidden patterns. Timing is another clue. The odd pause before answering a personal question, the repeated phrases used to fill uncomfortable silences, or the sudden change of subject when things get too close for comfort. These aren't flaws. They are fault lines cracked, where the carefully constructed performance begins to fracture, and the truth begins to leak. The smartest people don't focus on what's loud and obvious. They look for what feels off, what doesn't quite fit. They don't obsess over every detail, but rather they track emotional fingerprints, those unconscious behaviors people don't even realize they're showing. Real clarity isn't magic or some special intuition. It's discipline, it's pattern recognition, it's learning to stay silent long enough to notice what others are desperately trying not to reveal. Once you train that muscle, the world stops feeling chaotic. You stop being caught off guard. The masks people wear no longer seem impenetrable. They become like glass, fragile and transparent. These insights are not weapons used against others. They're tools that dismantle your own illusion. Nietzsche didn't study people to judge them. He studied them to see through their facade. What he discovered was uncomfortable but true. Everyone wears a mask not to deceive, but to survive. What you see isn't the real person. It's the version of themselves that made it through rejection, fear and pain. The louder the confidence, the more delicate the self underneath. The harshest critics often despise in others what they refuse to confront in themselves. When you mock arrogance, check your own self-worth. When you shame someone's performance, reflect on your own. Criticism is just a mirror, angled away from ourselves. Silence speaks louder than words. The truth sneaks in during pauses, delays, sighs, and forced smiles. People avoid what would expose them, and that avoidance is a silent confession. Self-deception comes before lying to others. People don't just fake their stories to fool you. They convince themselves first. I'm fine. I've moved on. I don't care. They say it so often they start to believe it, because they have no choice. Criticism is autobiography. When someone constantly points out what's wrong in the world, they're revealing what's broken inside themselves. Every complaint carries its own backstory, a wound left unhealed. Confidence is often a disguise for guilt. Those who seem calm and collected are sometimes the ones performing certainty to bury something unforgiven deep within. Exaggeration exposes insecurity. I never care. I'm always happy. I don't need anyone. The louder the claim, the more it screams the opposite. The truth about reading people isn't about catching lies or exposing secrets. It's about understanding the humanity behind the masks. It's about compassion for the fragility everyone carries, even when it's hidden behind a facade of strength. When you learn to see beyond the surface, you don't just read others, you start reading yourself. You recognize the masks you wear and why you wear them. That's where real insight begins, not in decoding others, but in uncovering your own truths. This is not about judgment. It's about seeing the beautiful complexity of being human, flawed, scared, and yet endlessly resilient. When you stop trying to control or fix, and start truly seeing, connection happens. Real connection. Beyond masks and defenses. So, slow down. Notice what's unsaid. Pay attention to the spaces between words, because that's where the truth lives, not in what people say, but in what they can't say. And when you finally see that, you stop being fooled by appearances. You start living with clarity, kindness and wisdom. Fear is often hiding beneath the surface, masked by the need for control. When someone micromanages every detail, it's not strength you're witnessing, it's fear. Controlling others feels safer than facing the chaos inside themselves. The hunger for control is really a cry for inner order. Loud morality. That's usually just a disguise for insecurity. The louder someone shouts about their virtue, the more they're covering up something they don't want to face. True goodness doesn't need an audience. It's quiet, humble, and steady. Performance is insecurity dressed in a costume. People aren't afraid of getting hurt. They're afraid of being truly seen. Vulnerability isn't dangerous because of pain. It's dangerous because it threatens the identity they've painstakingly built. Being exposed means the ego must die. What someone defends with the most passion often reveals their deepest doubts. If a person over-explains their beliefs, they're not trying to convince you, they're trying to convince themselves. The loudest voices in the room, the ones chasing attention online and offline, they're not vain. They're terrified of being forgotten. The need to be remembered hides a profound fear of insignificance. Envy rarely wears its true face. It hides behind hate. People don't attack what they despise. They attack what they secretly desire, but believe they'll never have. They don't hate you. They hate that they can't be you. No one speaks from pure logic. Every belief is rooted in pain. Opinions are built on scars, not facts. Every argument carries the weight of a wound beneath. Childhood doesn't vanish. It replays itself endlessly. The adult who dominates conversations was once ignored. The woman who hides her emotions was punished for expressing them. Behavior is biography, a story told without words. People mask uncertainty because they fear collapse. The more rigid someone's worldview, the more fragile their identity. Flexibility is strength. Dogma is fear with a megaphone. Desperation often masquerades as independence. I don't need anyone frequently means I've stopped hoping to be chosen. Watch for those who isolate, not because they're strong, but because they're exhausted from being let down. Patterns aren't accidents, they're confessions. You don't need someone to explain who they are. Watch their habits. Notice how they withdraw, how they respond to silence, who they chase, and who they avoid. These patterns aren't random. They're scars replaying their story. Nietzsche didn't hand us these truths to manipulate others. He gave them to us so we could stop confusing noise with honesty, performance with identity, and trauma with personality. Once you learn to see these patterns, people stop being mysteries, they become exposed. Every joke, every compliment, every insult, every silence, all come from someone. The mistake most make is believing behavior is random or rational. Nietzsche knew better. People don't argue because they're confident, they argue because they're scared. Their beliefs are all they have. They don't brag out of pride, they brag out of terror at being overlooked. They don't stay silent because they're calm. They stay silent because somewhere in childhood, silence became safe. The real question isn't what someone says, it's why they said it. A person who interrupts constantly was once unheard. A man who mocks does so because he was once ridiculed. A woman who avoids eye contact has likely been shamed. Every action is an echo of past pain. When you start seeing these truths, the world looks different. You stop mistaking noise for truth. You stop confusing masks for faces. You stop blaming others for behaviors shaped by wounds. Understanding this isn't about excusing bad behavior. It's about recognizing the hidden struggles beneath. It's about compassion for the wounded selves we all carry. People are not puzzles to solve or enemies to defeat. They are stories unfolding, scars wearing skin. The moment you grasp this, judgment softens and empathy grows. Look deeper, listen closely, see beneath the surface. That's where real connection begins. Behind every emotion lies a story few dare to tell. The man who refuses vulnerability was taught its weakness, so he hides behind walls of silence. The friend who never asks about your life learned early that attention is scarce, and they were never granted enough. They don't act this way out of malice. They're simply surviving on autopilot. Behind the sharpest minds often lurks a fear of being seen as less than. Behind the relentless pursuit of perfection is guilt that remains unnamed. Behind every display of power, there's often shame. Shame for what was left undone. Shame for who they became. Shame for the parts they buried just to keep moving forward. You won't hear these words spoken aloud, but you'll see the truth in their actions. The quickness to correct others. The desperate clinging to routines. The shutdown when intimacy knocks on the door. If you're truly paying attention, not just watching the surface performance, but decoding its origin, you'll uncover what most misbehavior isn't a message. It's a shield built around a wound. And once you stop reacting to the surface, and start asking, what pain is this protect? You don't just become more perceptive, you become free. Suddenly the anger, the coldness, the withdrawal, It wasn't about you. It was always about them. We live in a world obsessed with performance. Online, at work, even in intimate conversation, we're constantly on stage. Every Instagram caption, every "I'm fine" text, every carefully chosen outfit, every opinion voiced, every delayed reply. It's all performance. But Nietzsche saw this long before filters and followers. He wrote, "People don't live as they are. They live as the version of themselves they believe will be accepted." And that's the heart of the problem. We think people are hiding from us, but most of the time, they're hiding from themselves. It's the man who constantly boasts about his strength because he's terrified of appearing weak. The woman who fills her feed with healing quotes, even though she hasn't allowed herself to feel real pain in years. The friend who keeps joking, avoiding the silence that would force him to remember wounds still fresh. These aren't fakes, they're scared. Scared that if they drop the act, they'll be abandoned, rejected, or forgotten. So they craft their kindness to be admired, wield their beliefs, like weapons, to feel powerful, and flaunt independence to mask loneliness they dare not admit. And here's the cruelest truth, they often don't even realize they're doing it. When you ask someone how they're doing, they smile and say, "I'm good," but their jaw tightens, shoulders tense. Laughter feels just a beat too forced, and their eyes dart away when yours holds steady. They're not lying to deceive you. They're lying to protect the version of themselves they've been taught is safe. The strong one, the perfect one, the healer, the unbothered, the spiritual, the always in control. In a world that rewards image over honesty, that mask becomes survival. But beneath that mask is a person longing to be seen, not the polished performance, but the raw, vulnerable soul. The truth is, no one can hide forever. Masks slip, cracks appear, and when they do, you glimpse the real person beneath the act. This is where real connection begins, not in the performance, but in the shared humanity behind it. The question isn't how well someone hides, but how willing you are to see beyond the surface. Because when you learn to read between the lines, listen past the rehearsed answers, and notice the cracks in the armor, you don't just understand others, you begin to understand yourself. You realize how many masks you've worn, how many roles you've played to survive. And in that realization, the first step to freedom begins the courage to lower the mask and live as you truly are. In a world desperate for authenticity, that's the bravest act of all. Telling the truth, even to yourself, can feel like walking on a razor's edge. Yet, no matter how hard we try, truth finds its way out. It slips through the cracks of control, the sudden deflection when a subject gets too close, the quick apology for something small, the laugh that's just a little too loud, as if noise can cover the fractures underneath. These aren't random quirks, they are disguised confessions. It's the ego's quiet plea. I don't know how to be seen without breaking apart. As life piles on loss, pressure, uncertainty, the mask begins to crack. That's when the real moment arrives. The sigh that slips out unguarded, the pause that lingers just a second too long, the sudden quiet after a burst of certainty, eyes glistening before a sentence finishes, a breath caught as if holding back a storm. This isn't weakness, it's the soul surfacing, even if only for a fleeting second. The truest version of a person isn't who they perform to be, it's who they become when the act falls away. If you're someone who notices these shifts, who feels the room change before a word is spoken, who sees the cracks in the mask, you're not just observant, you're witnessing something sacred. The version of them they've hidden even from themselves, buried beneath layers of identity, survival, and the desperate need to be accepted. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Reading people stops being about judgment and starts becoming an act of compassion. Because when someone breaks character, they're finally showing you who they truly are. There's a moment that comes quietly, without warning, but never without impact. You're sitting in a conversation, listening to someone complain, posture themselves, or boast, and for the first time, you don't react. You don't take it personally. You don't feel attacked, nor the urge to defend yourself. You simply see them. You see the patterns, the tone, the rhythm, the over-explaining, the hollow confidence, the too loud silences. Then it clicks. This isn't about you. It never was. The things that used to sting, the coldness, the arrogance, the clinginess, lose their power. Now you recognize them for what they truly are. Wounds dressed as armor. Not weakness, but survival masquerading as dominance, silence, or virtue. And when this understanding takes root, something irreversible happens. Empathy emerges, not the superficial kind that wins applause or moral points, but the deep aching kind born from grief. The kind that comes from knowing just how difficult it is to be human. Once you glimpse what people are really running from, the guilt wrapped in their bragging, the fear hiding behind control, the sadness lurking beneath silence, you stop fighting the mask. You stop reacting to the surface. Instead, you meet the person beneath the performance, not to judge, but to understand, because true connection begins when we look past the act and recognize the heart beneath. And when that happens, everything changes. Start recognizing the pain that built the mask. That's what Nietzsche wanted, not to give you a weapon for control, not to help you manipulate others, but to help you stop being deceived. The real danger isn't that people lie. It's that they believe their own lies and expect you to live inside those illusions. They want you to respond to the character they play, not the truth buried beneath the role. If you can't see through the act, you fall for the drama. You chase approval from people who are deeply insecure, fear rejection from those terrified of connection, and feel less than in front of those quietly falling apart inside. But when you finally see people clearly, everything shifts. You don't flinch at rejection anymore, because you understand it's not the truth. It's a reflex born from pain. You don't get drawn into conflict, because drama isn't danger, it's emotional chaos. You don't fall for loud confidence, because noise is not power, it's fear dressed up as strength. You learn to read the situation instead of reacting to the emotion. In that space, clarity replaces confusion. You stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And start wondering, what part of them hurts so deeply that this is how they survive? In that clarity, anger fades. You no longer fight reality or carry someone else's trauma as your own. You stop making their dysfunction your burden. This isn't weakness, it's unshakable strength. Not coldness, but awakening. Awake to the architecture of human behavior. Awake to the patterns beneath personalities. Awake to the truth that most people aren't dangerous. They're just scared. When you see this, you stop needing to fight and begin choosing understanding. Because when you truly see people, manipulation dies, resentment fades, and power returns to you. You weren't becoming a reader. You were remembering something ancient and buried deep. The truth has always been visible. You just weren't taught how to see it. People leak their stories in every gesture, every contradiction, every silence they desperately try to fill. Now you know. More importantly, you see. What once looked like arrogance was fear. What felt like rejection was self-protection. What you once took personally was never about you. You're not just reading people, you're remembering that these patterns were always there. You only needed someone to point them out. Here's the paradox. The clearer you see others, the less you feel the need to defend yourself. What used to confuse and hurt you no longer has power. You don't need to react because you understand. You're not standing above people anymore. You're standing with them, finally seeing what they were too afraid to face. This was never about judgment. It was about awakening to the pain behind the perfection, the wounds beneath the armor, the humanity behind the behavior. And when you truly awaken to this, everything changes. You've probably felt it before, the frustrating disconnect, when people don't really see you. When your silence is mistaken for coldness, your strength misread as arrogance, or your softness seen as weakness. It's not that they didn't want to understand you. The truth is, they were wearing masks too, and people behind masks can't recognize the real faces of others. Nietzsche saw this more clearly than most. He knew that true power isn't about hiding behind walls or becoming unreadable. Real power is about showing up fully, flaws, fears, light and all, and still being accepted. To be truly seen and still chosen, that's not weakness. That's the highest form of courage and strength. So here's the thing, you were never really hidden. People around you already sensed who you were beneath the surface. The parts you thought were invisible were known all along. Now the difference is that you finally see yourself clearly. This clarity changes everything. When you stop trying to hide who you are, when you stop wearing the mask just to protect yourself, you step into a new kind of freedom. The freedom to be authentic, vulnerable, and whole. You stop fearing judgment because you realize the true test isn't whether others accept you, it's whether you accept yourself. You're no longer fragmented by confusion, or burdened by trying to fit into roles that don't fit you. You're embracing the truth that your silence carries meaning, your strength is real, and your softness is a quiet kind of power. When you show this fully to the world, the right people don't run away. They stay, they choose you, exactly as you are. And this choice, that acceptance, is not about settling or lowering your standards. It's about the rare and profound connection that happens when two souls meet without pretenses, when masks fall away and honesty reigns. It's the kind of connection that fuels growth, healing, and real intimacy. Remember, it's easier to hide than to reveal. Hiding feels safer because exposure risks rejection, but hiding also cuts you off from the deepest connections and the most genuine experiences life has to offer. Choosing to be seen with all your scars and contradictions is an act of bravery that rewrites the story of your life. The world needs that bravery. It needs people willing to drop the masks and stand in their truth. When you do, you inspire others to do the same. The cycle of misunderstanding breaks. The loneliness that comes from feeling unseen dissolves, and something greater begins, a collective awakening to authenticity and compassion. So don't shrink. Don't dull your light to make others comfortable. Don't silence your voice just to avoid discomfort. You were never meant to blend into the shadows. Your true power is in your presence, your honesty, your willingness to be seen fully and still stand strong. In the end, The real secret isn't about becoming unreadable or invisible. It's about becoming unmistakably yourself. When you step into that truth, you not only reclaim your own freedom, you invite the world to see what's always been there. Your unique, radiant, undeniable self. You were never truly hidden. You were always known. And now, for the first time, you know it too.